Welcome to True Echo, where real power isn't about wealth or titles, but what you do when no one believes you should belong. Today's story is one of courage, injustice, and poetic justice. A young black CEO walks into her own bank, and what happens next will leave you stunned. What happens when power walks in disguised, and prejudice responds with arrogance? This is the story of Jasmine Brooks, a black CEO who was humiliated in her own bank, only to turn the entire branch upside down 5 minutes later. The sun gleamed off the glass facade of Summit Wealth Bank, glinting like a blade under the Miami sky. At exactly 10 a.m., the doors swung open and Jasmine Brooks walked in, her steps quiet but precise. The staff didn't recognize her. They saw a black woman in jeans and loafers, nothing that screamed billionaire, or even high net worth. Jasmine liked it that way. In truth, she owned 81% of Summit Wealth and had come today, without announcement, to test the system from within. She wanted to see with her own eyes how her flagship branch treated its clients, especially those who didn't fit the polished, white-collar mold. When she approached the desk and calmly asked to withdraw $5 million from her personal account, the receptionist directed her to the VIP lounge, unaware of the storm about to erupt. Jasmine took her seat in a plush leather chair. She didn't look angry. She didn't need to be. The eyes she used were sharper than any surveillance camera. Then came the storm. Abigail Foster. Branch manager. Platinum hair. Impeccable suit. The type who judged before you even spoke. "You're not allowed to sit here," Abigail said, her voice cool and clipped. "This lounge is for genuine VIP clients." Jasmine remained calm. "I was directed here by your receptionist to complete a transaction." Abigail's eyes narrowed. "I'll need proof of your funds. These kinds of amounts raise red flags." Jasmine offered her tablet without hesitation. Abigail barely glanced at it. "This doesn't prove anything," Abigail said, dismissive. "We deal with real high-net-worth individuals. You'll have to wait outside." Moments later, Marcus Bradley walked in, one of Summit's most arrogant regulars. He saw Jasmine, smirked, and with a flick of his hand, sent her tablet crashing to the floor. "This bank isn't for people like you," he sneered. "Try a pawn shop." The humiliation was sharp, like a knife to the chest, but Jasmine didn't flinch. Natalie Simmons, a young officer nearby, chimed in, smug, "Where'd you even get that kind of money? Stolen it?" Jasmine's hand trembled briefly as she picked up her tablet. Not from fear. From rage she refused to unleash. Instead, she pressed a button. "Clara," she whispered into her Bluetooth mic, "activate Protocol 6. "Yes, Ms. Brooks," came the immediate reply from Clara Mitchell, her assistant. "Everything's being recorded. Internal audit team will arrive shortly." The test had begun. The branch had already failed. Jasmine could feel the pressure mounting in the room as the air thickened with disdain, whispers, and curiosity. She knew every word, every sneer, and every unjustified suspicion was now being preserved, not just as digital evidence but as living proof of the cultural rot inside the institution she owned. And then came Abigail's final insult. "If you can't prove the source of your money," she said, tilting her head arrogantly, "we'll be forced to escort you out. This isn't some boutique, you can't just walk in and demand millions." Jasmine didn't reply immediately. She simply stared. Not at Abigail, but through her. Through every person who'd ever doubted her, ever judged her, ever reduced her to a stereotype. She took a breath, calm and measured, and sat back in her chair. That's when Abigail made her second fatal move. "Tyler," she barked. A heavy-set security guard with buzzed hair entered from the main floor. "This woman refuses to leave the VIP area. I suspect attempted fraud." Before Jasmine could say a word, Tyler approached her with mechanical obedience, his face set like concrete. In a sudden motion, he slapped the leather pouch from her lap, sending its contents sprawling across the marble floor, phone, wallet, bank credentials, and her Summit Wealth Executive Access card. The entire lounge froze. Except one man. "Enough," a deep voice bellowed from across the room. Heads turned. It was Calvin Reed, a quiet, successful financial consultant and longtime client of the bank. Mid-40s, dressed sharp, and respected across Miami. He rose from his seat, his eyes blazing. "This is wrong," Calvin said, stepping between Jasmine and Tyler. "You're using brute force on a woman who hasn't raised her voice once. That's illegal. That's profiling." "She's under suspicion," Abigail retorted, her icy demeanor cracking. "Our clients deserve to feel safe." Calvin didn't back down. "You're not protecting clients, you're dehumanizing them. What kind of training do you people go through that lets this slide?" Some clients began murmuring. A few, until now silently entertained by the scene, started feeling uncomfortable. A woman nearby slipped her phone back into her purse. Another man lowered his head in shame. Natalie, perhaps sensing the tide turning, folded her arms tighter but remained quiet. Marcus Bradley just smirked from his chair, as if convinced this drama would end with Jasmine escorted out in shame. But Jasmine was done playing the silent observer. She stood slowly, brushed off her sweater, and picked up her executive access card. Holding it up, she turned to Abigail, Tyler, Marcus, and Natalie, her voice calm but cutting like a blade of glass. "Every move you've made here," she said, "is being documented. And within minutes, you're all going to realize just how far you've overstepped." Then, she turned her tablet toward Tyler. It showed the home screen of Summit Enterprises' CEO dashboard. Her name. Her control access. The internal audit protocol. Everything authenticated. But Tyler didn't get the chance to process it. The glass doors of the VIP lounge slid open, 5 sharply dressed professionals entered, badges already out. Clara Mitchell led the way. "Internal audit team," she announced crisply, her voice carrying authority. "We've received an urgent compliance flag for racial discrimination and misconduct. All branch activity is to be suspended until further notice." The blood drained from Abigail's face. Tyler froze mid-breath. Natalie visibly swayed. And Marcus, finally sat up straight. Jasmine stepped forward and addressed the room. "I'm Jasmine Brooks, CEO of Summit Enterprises. And for the past hour, I've watched this team violate every value we claim to uphold." No one could speak. No one dared. But Jasmine wasn't done. Jasmine's words struck like lightning through the marble and glass of the Summit Wealth VIP lounge. No one moved. Even the faint hum of background music had seemingly vanished. The revelation shattered whatever illusion of control Abigail and her staff thought they had. Clara Mitchell stepped up beside Jasmine, a tablet in hand, already recording. "We have video, audio, and first-hand statements. The misconduct is undeniable." Jasmine nodded and looked directly at Abigail. "I gave you multiple chances. I even handed you documentation without revealing who I was. But you made a decision, not based on protocol, not on facts, but on bias." Abigail's voice was faint now, trembling as she tried to piece together her defense. I didn't know who you were. If I had known." "That's exactly the problem," Jasmine interrupted, her tone turning colder. "You shouldn't have to know someone's title to treat them with dignity." Natalie stepped forward, her face still flushed from earlier. "Miss Brooks, please. I was only following instructions," Robert Turner said. Clara interrupted sharply. "We've already subpoenaed Robert Turner's internal communications. The instructions he gave to staff to profile black clients are logged, archived, and will be sent to the board by the end of today." The murmur in the room began to rise. Clients whispered to one another, some expressing outrage, others pure disbelief. Calvin Reed crossed his arms, visibly proud of the stand Jasmine was taking. Marcus Bradley, however, scoffed and attempted to slip toward the exit, muttering, "This is ridiculous." Jasmine's voice froze him mid-step. "Don't move, Mr. Bradley." He turned, startled. "You publicly humiliated me, threw my property to the ground, and taunted me because of my skin color. That's not just an insult, it's defamation inside a financial institution. You're banned from every branch under my jurisdiction, effective immediately." Marcus opened his mouth but quickly closed it again. For once, the wealthy investor had no words. Jasmine turned to Clara. "Clara, execute disciplinary action on site. Prepare termination files for Abigail Foster, Natalie Simmons, and Tyler Evans. Effective immediately." "Yes, Ms. Brooks." Abigail gasped, stumbling back a step. You can't fire us on the spot. We have rights." "You had a responsibility," Jasmine snapped, her eyes narrowed. "And you failed it catastrophically. Your rights weren't violated. But you violated the rights of someone you thought couldn't fight back." Tyler Evans bowed his head in silence. He didn't protest. Perhaps somewhere in him, he understood this day was inevitable the moment he followed orders without question. Natalie, still crying, tried one last desperate plea. "Miss Brooks, please. I need this job. I was wrong. I know that. But I have a daughter." Jasmine's jaw clenched. For a brief second, emotion flickered in her eyes. Then her tone softened just slightly. "I will consider your circumstances during HR review. But let me be clear, apologies mean little if they only come after exposure." Natalie crumpled into her chair, sobbing, the weight of her choices crashing down. The other clients stood in silent respect. A few applauded. And Calvin Reed stepped forward once more. "You've just restored a lot of faith today, Ms. Brooks. Not just in this bank, but in leadership that does more than talk." Jasmine gave a small nod of thanks. But she knew the moment wasn't over yet. There was still more truth to be revealed, and the most unexpected confession was just moments away. The atmosphere inside Summit Wealth's VIP lounge was as thick as fog. Staff stared in stunned silence, unsure whether to retreat or plead. The audit team continued their work quietly, documenting every confession, scanning communication logs, and interviewing stunned employees behind glass doors. Just when Jasmine thought the storm had crested, a quiet voice rose from the corner of the lounge. "I believe. I need to speak." It was Richard Bennett. Older than most, with silver hair and weary eyes, Richard had been sitting in silence this entire time, partially hidden behind a tall leather armchair. A respected figure in Summit Wealth's long history, he had once served as head of training and culture, a man revered for his decades of service. He stood now, back straight, voice calm, but filled with the weight of conscience. "I trained some of these people," he said softly, looking at Abigail, Natalie, and others. "Years ago, when Summit was expanding rapidly, I was responsible for developing our customer experience modules. And I realize now, with deep regret, that I failed to foresee how my teachings would morph into what we've witnessed today." All eyes turned toward him. Even Jasmine was caught off guard. She hadn't expected this. Richard looked directly at her. "Miss Brooks. I created the system that taught staff to classify clients by risk appearance. Not by behavior. Not by transaction history. But by surface judgments, dress, accent, even race." Gasps rippled through the room. Even Clara's poised fingers froze above her tablet for a split second. Richard's hands trembled as he went on. "It was subtle. We called it profiling for fraud protection. But we knew what we were doing. And we told ourselves it was harmless. Efficient. Necessary." He paused. "It was none of those things." The older man now looked down, his voice breaking. "When I saw you being mistreated, I wanted to intervene. But shame held me back. Because I realized. I built the very weapon they used to disrespect you. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She let him speak, because unlike the others, Richard wasn't hiding behind excuses. He was owning it. Fully. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he added. I'm simply telling the truth. I failed you. I failed the bank. And I failed every client who ever walked through our doors hoping for dignity and received disdain instead. A long silence followed. Jasmine slowly walked over to Richard, standing only a few feet from him now. Their eyes met, hers sharp and unreadable, his filled with guilt and hope. Thank you, she said finally. Your words won't erase what's been done. But they're a start. An acknowledgement. And that's more than I've seen from most leaders twice your age. Richard bowed his head. Clara stepped forward and whispered to Jasmine, what do you want to do with him? Jasmine was quiet for a long moment. Then she answered, her voice firm. Include Mr. Bennett's confession in the official investigation log. And make sure it's presented to the board. His training framework was the blueprint for this culture, and it must be fully dismantled. Yes, ma'am. But Jasmine wasn't done. Richard, she said, if you're truly committed to change, I want you to come out of retirement. One last project. You will help us rebuild everything, from the ground up. But this time, rooted in fairness, transparency, and human decency. The room buzzed. The very architect of a broken system, being given the chance to rebuild it. It was bold. Radical. But so was Jasmine. Richard blinked. You, still trust me to do that? I trust those who take responsibility, Jasmine replied. And I believe redemption is earned by action. The weight in Richard's shoulders seemed to lift for the first time in years. He nodded solemnly. You have my word. Jasmine turned to the rest of the staff and clients, who were now gathered in a loose semicircle around her. But she wasn't ready to close this chapter yet. One more decision remained, a move that would rock the entire financial industry and rewrite Summit Wealth's legacy forever. The crowd inside Summit Wealth's VIP lounge was now silent, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the stillness that precedes something historic. Jasmine stood in the center of the room, surrounded by fired staff, stunned clients, and an internal audit team whose pens had barely stopped moving. Everyone sensed it. The moment was about to transform from justice into revolution. Jasmine raised her voice just enough to reach every corner of the room. I've made my decisions regarding the individuals who caused harm today. But let me be clear, this isn't about punishing a few people and walking away. It's about addressing the culture that allowed this to fester. Clara stood to Jasmine's right, her tablet buzzing with incoming approvals and updates from the board. Ms. Brooks, she said, legal and HR are ready. They're asking if you want to proceed with full operational lockdown. Jasmine gave a single nod. Effective immediately, she announced, this branch will be suspended from normal operations. We are initiating a full-scale reform, beginning with what I call the Summit Fairness Initiative. Gasps filled the room. A lockdown? Clients looked at one another, unsure whether to feel worried or inspired. Jasmine pressed forward, her voice rising with determination. This initiative will be the most rigorous reform program in the history of our institution. Every employee, from entry-level to senior management, will undergo ethics, bias, and communication training. No exception. She scanned the room slowly, making eye contact with everyone, from clerks to tellers to remaining officers hiding behind glass walls. There will be full transparency moving forward. Every customer complaint will be reviewed not by internal staff, but by an independent ethics committee comprised of civil rights attorneys, community leaders, and former clients. Clara smiled faintly. Already assembling the list. Jasmine continued. If we are to be a financial institution worthy of our clients' trust, then we must start by earning it, person by person, case by case. It was then that Calvin Reed, the man who had first stood to defend her, raised his voice again. Miss Brooks, I've been banking here for over 10 years. I've seen many initiatives come and go. But this feels real. Jasmine turned to him and smiled. It is. Because it's not about protecting the bank's image anymore. It's about protecting its soul. Applause broke out again, but Jasmine raised her hand to gently lower it. There's one final decision I must share, she said, her voice turning somber. The room quieted. We are terminating Assistant Branch Manager Robert Turner, effective immediately. His discriminatory directives caused direct harm and created a hostile work environment. He will also be reported to the Financial Conduct Authority for ethics violations. A few employees flinched. Robert Turner, though not present, had long been feared for his unchecked authority. His downfall sent a chilling signal across every Summit Wealth branch in the country. And one more, Jasmine added. Every staff member who stood by silently today, who witnessed what happened and said nothing, will receive mandatory ethics training and undergo performance re-evaluation. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity. She looked to Clara. Add that to the initiative. Clara tapped swiftly. Logged and confirmed. Jasmine took a breath. Her shoulders had carried the weight of power and pain all day, but now, she looked lighter. More resolute. I didn't come here today to make a statement. I came here to fix something broken. And it starts now. The room, once a place of judgment and exclusion, now felt like the heart of something righteous. Something urgent. Something new. But Jasmine knew the transformation wasn't complete, not until her final message reached beyond this room, beyond this branch, beyond Miami itself. She had one more thing to say, and it would echo far beyond Summit Wealth's walls. By now, every soul inside Summit Wealth Bank's flagship branch understood they weren't just witnessing a corporate shakeup, they were part of a reckoning. Employees clung to the walls, customers stood rooted in place, and even the security team looked like statues, waiting for Jasmine Brooks' next move. Jasmine stepped forward, her face glowing not with vengeance, but with righteous resolve. She didn't need to shout. Her presence carried weight enough. This isn't just about me, she said, her voice even, resonating. This is about every black customer who's ever been asked, are you sure you can afford this? Every immigrant spoken to more slowly. Every single mother told she's confusing the forms. Every veteran judged for the clothes they wore. She scanned the room. For too long, Summit Wealth Bank has prided itself on prestige, while silently reinforcing prejudice. That ends today. Clara, ever the efficient shadow, stepped beside her again. We just received final sign-off from the board. The Summit Fairness Initiative is now active, system-wide. 73 branches will be audited. 67 senior managers notified. Cheers rippled through the room, but Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned to the cameras, several phones now streaming, recording, relaying this moment live to thousands online. Let this be a warning and a promise. No amount of status or tradition will protect those who uphold discrimination. But if you're willing to change, to admit your faults, to take action, then there is a place for you at Summit. A soft sound broke through the stillness, applause. It began with Calvin Reed. Then a few more. Soon, the room was echoing with respectful claps, not out of politeness, but out of deep admiration. And then came the final confession. From the hallway, a young woman stepped forward, nervous, hesitant. Ms. Brooks, she said quietly. My name is Karina James. I'm a teller. I've worked here 3 years. Jasmine nodded gently. Go on. I saw how certain files were flagged. Certain customers treated differently. I didn't speak up. I thought maybe I'd lose my job. But, that's no excuse. She swallowed hard. I'm willing to undergo every bit of training you've mentioned. I want to stay. But only if I can help rebuild this place into something I can be proud of. Jasmine walked over to Karina, extended her hand. "Thank you for your honesty," she said warmly. "And for your courage. You're exactly the kind of person I want to help lead this change." Karina blinked back tears as she nodded. In the background, Clara received a final notification from legal, all terminations processed. Board support confirmed. Protocol 6 closed. Jasmine turned back to the audience. Summit Wealth isn't just a bank. It's a symbol. And starting today, we're going to make sure it symbolizes fairness, transparency, and humanity. The applause now roared. Even the clients who had sat silently through the drama, some of them initially entertained by it, rose to their feet, clapping hard, many with tears in their eyes. But Jasmine wasn't basking in triumph. Her eyes carried the look of a woman who knew, real change begins not with applause, but with the hard, unglamorous work that follows. And that's exactly what she was about to begin. The VIP lounge that once buzzed with entitlement and prejudice now pulsed with something far more powerful, truth. Jasmine Brooks stood centered in the storm she had calmed and conquered, surrounded not by staff and clients, but by witnesses to history. And she knew, before she walked out those doors, the world needed a final message. Clara Mitchell handed her a slim microphone connected to the bank's internal system. The cameras were still rolling. Streams were live. Employees from branches across the country had already begun tuning in after receiving system alerts. Jasmine took the mic, her fingers steady. Her voice, when she began, was quiet, but unmistakably commanding. "Today, we faced something uncomfortable," she began. "Not because it was new, but because we stopped pretending it wasn't there." She let the words hang for a moment, then continued. "What happened here isn't an isolated incident. It's the natural result of silence. Of performance over principle. Of smiling at clients we prefer and sneering at those we don't understand." Jasmine turned slowly, meeting the gaze of everyone still standing. "But we will no longer build a bank on silence and status. We will build it on integrity. On fairness. On people." Then, her voice softened slightly. "You see, I didn't come here to make an example out of anyone. I came to see if the values in our mission statement actually live in the people behind the counters. And today I saw the truth." She paused. "And now, we change it." At that, she stepped aside, allowing Clara to address the nationwide staff. "The Summit Fairness Initiative begins immediately," Clara announced. "All employees are required to undergo a 6-week ethics and conduct retraining program. An independent committee will oversee complaints and review performance across every branch." She looked at the camera, then back to the room. "Anyone unwilling to embrace this change will not have a future at Summit. That's not a threat, it's a promise." Clara stepped back. Jasmine returned to the center. As the room held its breath one final time, Jasmine closed with words that would echo long beyond the day. Discrimination doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispers in policies. Hides in habits. Smiles behind desks. But whether loud or quiet, it rots everything it touches. And the only way to stop it, is to call it out and cut it out. A long silence followed. Then, spontaneous applause erupted, not forced or ceremonial, but raw, heartfelt, emotional. Jasmine didn't smile in triumph. She simply nodded, collected her things, and turned to exit. At the doors, Calvin Reed stopped her. "Ms. Brooks," he said, offering a hand. "Thank you, for not just being the CEO we needed, but for being the kind of person who leads with truth." She shook his hand, firm and warm. "Thank you for standing when others stayed seated." As she stepped outside into the Miami sunlight, reporters had already begun gathering. News was spreading fast. But Jasmine wasn't focused on the cameras. She was focused on the future. A future she had just reshaped with a single, powerful message. Silence allows injustice to breathe. But one voice, One woman willing to stand, can suffocate it. And as Summit Wealth Bank's glass doors shut behind her, Jasmine Brooks knew the true work was only beginning. Jasmine Brooks reminded us that silence protects injustice, and speaking up dismantles it. Her stand wasn't just for herself, it was for every person ever underestimated, profiled, or pushed aside. As she proved, you don't have to raise your voice to raise a revolution, just your standards. What would you have done in Jasmine's place? Comment below, share your thoughts, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to True Echo for more stories that expose, inspire, and empower. We'll see you in the next one.